Good day, everybody. My name is Brad Steele. I'm the Senior Director of Unified Communications for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and I am an NASDD past president and life member. NASDD is made up of technology professionals serving state government. It's a member-driven organization whose purpose is to advance and promote the effective use of information technology and services to improve the operation of state government. Part of our Constitution has in its purpose and goals that we should engage in programs for the training, education, and development of technology professionals from all areas of state government. While I was president a few years ago, we decided to put together a set of educational videos to help further that effort. We call them IT 101 videos. And to help us with the education of our membership, we ask industry professionals 10 questions plus or minus about a technology, service, or strategy that we need help with. If you haven't seen the videos that we put together before, you can go back to the NASDD website and you should see a link to our YouTube channel. We do ask that once you're on that YouTube channel that you do like the videos and follow NASDD to help us get our content more widely spread. So the topic for today's conversation is something that I think everybody has talked about probably every day for the last 6 months, but there's still a lot of questions around it. So I thought we would cover it a little more in depth. So we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence, AI, and for that we have Tony Holmes from Pluralsight, and Tony is the practice lead for Solutions Architects Public Sector. And he has the best bio I have ever read, so here we go. Pathological problem solver and serial question asker, a lifelong student of mental models, experienced in creating innovative solutions where analogical ideas meet rigorous Socratic methods. For more than 2 decades, Tony has solved complex problems for some of the largest and most forward-thinking technology organizations in the world, including the BBC, Digital Equipment Corporation, Microsoft Research, Opsware, Hewlett-Packard, Oracle, and currently Pluralsight, the technology skills platform for the government. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
And as if by reading your bio, that I needed to ask a fun fact, because I think that your bio is a fun fact. I always ask one fun fact. So outside of work, what's something fun about you? What's something unique that you can tell me about you to make us know you a little better?
I think probably for people that know me better, probably the most interesting fun fact is that I used to be a cop, or as a bobby, as you refer to them in the UK. I spent some time doing that, and I have a great deal of respect for the folks that do law enforcement work and the folks in justice. And that was my experience of towing the thin blue line, as they say.
Nice. So when my wife and I were watching Grantchester, we could have been watching the life and times of Tony Holmes.
I don't think my life's nearly that exciting. It was much more mundane than that, as I'm sure any police officer will attest.
So if you haven't seen that, Tony, I will tell you it's worth a watch. But as I think I mentioned to you before in talking about that, that little tiny town in outside of London is probably the highest crime rate anywhere in the world, according to that television program.
Yeah, I think it was Alfred Hitchcock that said, like, movies are just life with the boring stuff cut out. So I think that's very relevant in this case as well.
Probably so. So speaking of cutting out the boring, let's get right into this, because this is a topic that has been exciting people. Really, it's not a new concept. I think it's just something that is, it's coming to the forefront because of how progressively it has been changing and how it's been really infiltrating our day-to-day life in the last couple of months and years. So we're here to talk about AI So the first thing I need to know is, what is AI and what's the difference between AI and generative AI?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. It's one that people don't ask enough because, when we try to have any conversation about a subject, it's important that we kind of declare terms going into it for context reasons. So it's used very interchangeably at the moment, as you know, amongst the different areas of industry. And I think the most important thing to know is that artificial intelligence, so let me take a step back. Generative AI is a subset of artificial intelligence, but the broad concept of AI is it encompasses techniques that allow computers to mimic human behavior and to some extent intelligence, which is where the term comes from. And typically it can include applications such as data analysis or robotics and natural language processing, which is where generative AI comes in. But its job as a whole is to perform tasks that require human intelligence, recognizing patterns, making decisions. Generative AI is a subcategory of that. It focuses specifically on creating new content. So we've seen the generative AI images. We've seen people, write letters with it now. So that's the purpose of generative AI. It's primarily used for generating text, images, music, whatever, from other forms of media. And the concept is that it uses data sets, the large language models, as you've heard them called, or LLMs, is basically their large data set that allows them to produce new and original content. So they'll analyze what you're asking and then they'll try and create something in accordance with that. To help, maybe this will help a little bit. I try to refer to the two different things in terms of their use case. So I refer to specific use AI, so things like chatbots and things like that in terms of, RPC. So we use them for our help desks and things. I refer to that as micro AI, which is AI that's used for a very narrow and specific use case. And then I refer to generative AI as macro AI, simply because it has such a broad use in almost everyday context that you can think of, and certainly in the work environment, which I'll probably mention in a minute, I've no doubt.
Okay. And so now that we know, what this is and the difference between the two terms, where are we seeing AI and generative AI enter into the enterprise?
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of different from both sectors simply because of the different objectives. So obviously, there's a lot of AI entering private sector from the perspective of sales and marketing. Now, obviously, in public sector, we don't have sales and marketing teams, or maybe we do, but we call them press and communications. But I guess so. So we're seeing that a lot. So we're seeing things like Salesforce, the customer relationship management, becoming very focused on trying to get as much as they can out of it. And supply chain management's another great place where we're using it in private sector. I think in public sector, because the objectives are so different. So in private sector, we're not worried about making profit. We're worried about, excuse me, a more varied deployment. So we're looking at sectors like transportation and healthcare and public safety that, are much more focused on emphasizing public service, trying to make more efficiency, trying to make our government teams more efficient, and trying to do more with less, as we always are, because I never met a federal employee or a public sector employee yet that said, I've just got too much budget. So I think from that perspective, there's a great deal of difference in how we're approaching the use of it.
We never have enough budget. We never have enough people. So I'm sure this helps with both.
It does.
So what are some of the benefits that we're seeing from the use of AI, especially in state government?
I think with regards to the benefits, so this is a really good one. There's a lady who does some keynotes at some of the events I attend. She works for the Air Force. I think she's head of their AI. I'm trying to think of her. It's Alexis. I'm trying to think of her surname, and it escapes me at the moment. It might be Bonnell or something like that. But anyway, it's very interesting because a large part of what she talks about is how government employees can be helped. And there's a lot of people out there that say, well, we need RPA. We need to be able to have chatbots. So when someone comes and says, how do I file my state taxes? The chatbot can say, okay, let's get some context about you, and then we can give you something back. And that's a really important use case, as are the use cases about how we deal with infrastructure, how we deal with emergency response and things like that. But above that, those are very valid use cases where they can make a lot of impact. But we already mentioned how no public sector organization, no agency has enough budget, and no agency has enough people. So imagine something like generative AI, which I think is sometimes viewed on as being less than real AI, when in actual fact, looking at it as someone that deals with public sector all day long, to me it seems that if you have a technology at your fingertips where you can say to 10,000 employees, hey, we can take 10% of the mundane, brain draining work off of your plate for you by giving you access to this tool, and we can teach you and show you how to use it better. First of all, you get a huge efficiency increase, okay? Instead of the person sitting there having to draw up charts for that meeting, trying to draw out graphs to understand growth or whatever else it is you're trying to illustrate, we can do it in 5 minutes or 10 minutes instead of half a day or a day's work. The other thing is, believe it or not, people hate doing the dreary stuff. And as a result of that, one of the problems we have in public sector is staff attrition. Public sector is good and it's a worthy cause, but that private sector stuff just looks so much more exciting and so much more interesting, and they pay better and everything else. So attrition becomes an issue. If you can remove a lot of this mundanity out of people's public sector day-to-day jobs and actually have them doing more interesting, more valuable work, because remember, it's the brains that separate us from the AI. If we can offload that work, then all of a sudden you get increased retention of staff and people being a lot less, feeling a lot less like their souls being sucked out of them day by day. And I think that's a super important thing to bear in mind as we go forward with this. And as we try and wrap our arms around it and say this is important and we must protect the world from this, I think there needs to be a counterpoint to that where people say, but at the same time, we need to think about what's possible with this, what great things we can achieve with it. I think at the moment, there's the CISO approach where we must protect the world from it. And then there's the innovator approach where there's so much possible. And I think seeing both perspectives is vital rather than just being, a doom and gloomer.
Yeah, and I know that, from personal experience that when you're on the other side of that equation, so you were talking about it from the worker's standpoint, but also if you're on the other side of the fence and you're looking for some basic information or a password reset or something like that, if we can automate that and get the customer more satisfied, they're more likely to call us next time they have a question or an issue that they need more complex help with, and could get to that human help. So
yeah, 100%. I mean, how many people get something from the treasurer's department or the revenue department, and they sit there and go, I need to call them, and boy, this is going to be a breeze.
Yep.
It's just not. So yeah,
not usually. All right, so those are some great benefits and definitely some positives. So what are some of the bad effects?
I think first of all, there's the big ones that we've all heard about. So we've got misinformation and deep fakes. So generative AI very much adheres to the GIGO concept, garbage in, garbage out. And I think it's something that I talk a lot about. And so misinformation and deep fakes, okay? First of all, it can tell people things that aren't true. It can hallucinate, as we call it. The famous case is the lawyer who was late and didn't have enough time, and he tried to create some court documents using artificial intelligence or generative AI in this particular case. And it did a really, really good job and highlighted some amazing case law. The only problem is that the case law that it used didn't actually exist. So when it came under scrutiny from the judge, obviously you can imagine there was a lot of serious questions asked because nobody could find the case law that it was referring to. It was almost too perfect. So that's an example. I think deep fakes is another issue, especially as we enter such a fraught election period as we are at the moment. You know, there isn't anywhere where it's low stakes right now. And I think from that perspective, people are very easily led on the internet. People spend a lot of time believing what they see, and I think that's difficult as well. The other problem is intellectual property issues. There's a lot of people out there that assume that everything that generative AI creates is new and fantastic, when in actual fact, by definition, because it uses all this data, it has to be derivative. So whether it takes a little or a lot from some other place, it's not it's not necessarily original. So the ability for generative AI to fall foul of intellectual property issues. And I think the other thing which we all need to be careful of is quality control. Quality control, it can come back and it can generate a lot of information, but whilst it can take the tedium out of generating the content, it's not yet good enough where we can just assume it's done the right thing. We have to be on top of that and say, okay, it's generated the content. Now I'm going to check the graphs it's generated to make sure it's not lying to me. I'm going to check the content to see if it hasn't created any case law that doesn't exist or whatever reference it is. And one of the best ways that we can do that is to be intentional about how we ask questions of generative AI. For example, always ask it when it makes a claim to cite its sources. You know, up front, make that something you always do. Cite the sources that you use in order to answer this question, and that will put you in a position where you can actually follow up and say, okay, this is a real thing. It does exist, and it's not hallucinating. I think those are the kind of the main ones that people are talking about. The one other I wanted to mention, because I think it's really important, is job displacement, because it's one that gets talked about a lot. I don't think it's going to be as bad as many people think. I think the problem is that people are going to need to be adaptable. So I think going out to our staff, going out to our teams of people and saying, hey, we're going to help you learn about this so you can use it as a tool, rather than being a Luddite and saying, I'm never going to use this, and I'm going to put dig my heels in and draw a line in the sand and say, you know, I'm a smart person and I'll never be displaced. And I think that's the wrong attitude to take.
Okay, so you were talking about the misinformation and kind of that. So can there be, is there a potential that there could be bias within AI? Oh.
So going back to what I was saying earlier, I think when we talk about AI, everything it produces, generative AI, everything it produces is derivative. That includes bias. So if you think about it, what data do we train artificial intelligence or generative AI with? What are the large language models? Well, they're based on human data created by human people, and it makes decisions based on context from questions that are asked by humans. So there's a bias issue potential there. However, I think people don't expect, or people that don't work with data every day don't expect, they expect it to somehow be better than humans, when the knowledge and information it's using is humans, which are probably more biased than any organism on planet Earth. So, you know, again, what you feed it is exactly what you're going to get back out of it. And trying to feeding it human knowledge that is inherently biased and then expecting it to not be biased I think is a big ask. And I think it's just something, the same as when we deal with interacting with each other, it's just something we have to be aware of and take care that we don't just accept the bias and we challenge that bias.
So Brad Steele's AI on sports history would all be Patriots, Bruins, Red Sox, and Celtics, right?
Yeah, or potentially give much more detailed and more biased results about it, because it has much greater knowledge than it does about the other teams that it's trying to compare against. So yeah, absolutely.
All right, and then you touched on it a little bit, you know, about the job displacement and everything. What are some of the other myths that we might think of when we talk about AI?
Something that high school students are recently finding out, much to their cost, is that they think AI is infallible. You know, I want to, and that goes for the lawyer use case we used previously as well. I'm going to use generative AI and I'm going to assume it's the smartest thing that I can possibly use, and therefore it's infallible. And anything it gives me back, I can use and be 100% confident in its soundness or its capabilities. And it's a system, it's an algorithm. So all systems can and do make errors, especially when dealing with situations that are out of the norm, or when they're based on flawed or limited data, as we just explained a second ago with the whole Patriots thing. And I think the other thing is that what makes generative AI useful, and the reason that it needs us, is because generative AI is just kind of one step up from Google. So when we used to ask a question of Google, we'd say, hey, Google, give me information about the Patriots' last 3 games. You might be looking for stats, but Google will spit out a whole bunch of information at you, and you'll have to go down. Oh, here's one with the stats that I probably need. And you'll go into it and look at the stats. The benefit of generative AI is it's like Google with context. So as a human, you say, I want information on the last 3 games of the Patriots, and I also I'm interested specifically in understanding the statistics of the game, the stats, the yards, whatever else I want to understand. And generative AI has the ability to take that context and then sift through the information. So it's kind of like the next step. So I think from that perspective, that's an important thing to bear in mind. That AI doesn't understand context. We have to provide the context, and that's what makes it useful to us and why it can't so easily replace us, because AI isn't good at understanding context unless we tell it specifically the context that we're looking for the information in.
Yeah. So again, garbage in, garbage out. If you ask a bad question, you're going to get bad answers.
100%.
Yeah. So how can we effectively use AI in state governments?
I think this is a great question. It goes back to taking the mundanity out of public sector workers' lives. Okay, if we can remove the form filling, or the chart making, or whatever else it is that we can take out that kind of sucks the soul out of public sector workers' lives, it then allows them to carry on using the same tool set, but to use data for better decision making. So generative AI is really good at saying, take this set of data, what can you tell me about it? And then you can have a back and forth conversation with it. Well, I see these things and these things. Okay, let's explore this a little bit further. And it allows you to have this much more interesting conversation around understanding new ideas, or understanding what the data's showing you, which you can't do normally because you're so busy trying to keep on top of the paperwork. Let's call it paperwork. I think that's one of the big places. I think one of the other things is it's really useful for bouncing ideas off of, like crisis management, like I said, emergency management, understanding traffic flow patterns, just things that might take a lot of time, but for to not use AI, and you might not even use the end result, but it allows you, it gives you the effort to bounce ideas off of it. Again, going back to this lady from the Air Force, Alexis, I think one of the things that she said is that she was working with a team of individuals, and they were ideating and trying to come up with concepts around a specific strategy. And they had a day off site, and they were working really hard on this, trying to strategize around this. And they came up with a list of 10 points or something. And then they went away and asked generative AI the same questions about what they were strategizing about. And something like 8 out of the 10 points it came back with in less than 30 seconds. And her observation was, imagine if we'd asked generative AI first, how much extra time we could have spent understanding the 2 strategies that it didn't come up with, and understanding and exploring those further. And I think from that perspective, it excites me a great deal to think that it enables us to use our best brains and our best minds to do our best work, rather than grinding out the obvious stuff. And I think that's when we start leading to innovation in public service and in public sector, is when we can truly start to come up with ideas and strategies that are innovative, rather than having to default to the norm because we're under resourced and we don't have enough time to do it. So that excites me as well.
Excellent. So what's the best thing that we can do to govern and, uh, limit without strangling ourselves, but limit AI?
Yeah, I think that's a really, I mean, that's charged. That's as good as the ethics conversation, really. But it's a really charged conversation to have. I think one of the conversations that we have is that we trust people to run infrastructure. We hire people and skill them to be able to run infrastructure. We hire Air Force personnel to be able to fly $35 million planes, but we're not so sure about trusting them as to whether they'll share information that's private to our organization or not. I think whilst the risk is there, I think it's a lot lower than people um, are estimating, because when we look at it from that perspective, we just need to make sure, hey, these are the guardrails. We've got strong policy around this. This is why we don't do it. It's a black box. We can't be sure where this information's going. So in the early instances, and this is obviously going to change, the market is going to drive generative AI to the point where enterprises are going to have their own data space, so to speak, their own captured area that has rails around it, so it doesn't escape, so to speak, ring fence data. So I think that will change, but for now, don't be scared, because some of these organizations, some of these people already have very highly trusted within the public service, within the public sector. And this is really no different from them saying, well, hang on a minute, we don't send this kind of data over email. We have to be careful about who we send this to. We don't put this kind of data in the public's PII data that we're trusted with. This is what you don't do with it. So I think people are more than capable, if we give them a set of guidelines, to say, hey, you know the rules, go ahead and use it, but do so carefully, do so responsibly. Um, I don't think we're going to be able to idiot proof it. Stuff like that always happens. What is it they say? As soon as you idiot proof something, they invent a better idiot. Um, so, but for the majority of our workforce, for the majority of public sector employees, we hire them because they're smart, they're responsible. We trust them with email. We trust them with sensitive citizen information. Why can't we trust them with generative AI and give them those guardrails? Is what I would say.
I like it. I like it. So, I told you this would be relatively painless. We're almost at our time limit here. So I
Sure.
have just my final question that I always ask. I like to ask everybody, and that is, what did I forget to ask you? What else do
I
we need to
think.
know?
Oh, I think. Oh, my camera's frozen. Excuse me. Okay, I think that what you forgot to ask me is how fast is the tech moving? Because I think that's vital. We already touched on the fact that um, you know generative AI organizations and companies are going to come up with ways to make sure that people can use generative AI without their data leaking into other places. I think that's vital. Humans are really, really bad at thinking exponentially. Humans tend to think linearly. So what we tend to think is, what does AI look like for the next 5 years? Well, it will look like the same progression that we had in the last 5 years. And what actually happens is a much more exponential acceleration of growth and innovation within the technology space, especially something that's getting as much attention and as much investment as generative AI is. So I think one of the things that I would say is it's something that we need to embrace, but it's going to be hard to keep up with. Understand it's going to move quickly. And if you just look at anybody that has access to something like Midjourney or another generative image tool, go out there and Google what the models of the early Midjourney or generative AI image tools look like and compare them to what they're like today. It's been less than 18 months, and the difference in ability of those models is absolutely amazing. So that's all I would say is bear in mind that what you think is going to happen over the next 5 years is probably going to happen at least twice as quick as you think it is, twice as quick as you predict it will.
Uh, it's amazing to me. People are talking about AI and in treating it like it's something new. It's already in our lives. We're using it every day. And even when we don't know that we're using it, I think sometimes we are using it. Watson played on Jeopardy in 2011.
Yeah.
And so, that's a lifetime in technology. And it really is progressing, at the speed of light. And with every increase that comes, you're basically turning that wheel up, and it's not going to be very long until we're just pointing straight up with progression just going every moment of every day.
Right.
So,
And I think just briefly, I think the 2 decades thing in my bio at the beginning was probably a typo. But what I heard was that back in the day we had mainframes, and then we had server virtualization, and people said, "Hey, that looks a lot like mainframes." Then we had cloud, and people said, "Hey, that looks a lot like server virtualization." So, the more things change, the more they stay the same. The technology evolves, and we call it different names, but ultimately, we're still seeking the same path of progress. And just looking back at the pace of everything and the speed at which it's moving is really mind-boggling.
yeah, cool. Well, like I said, I told you this would be painless. It wouldn't hurt. That ends our Q&A session, our IT 101. Hopefully this has been helpful to you out there in the audience. I apologize for my dog crashing through the door a few minutes ago, and hopefully that wasn't too distracting. Gus has made another appearance in one of my videos, so there you go. So thank you again, Tony Holmes from Pluralsight. And if you have any questions about this topic, please reach out to me, Brad Steele, brad.steele@mass.gov, and we can see if we can get you any answers. And if you have any ideas for future IT 101s, please reach out to me as well. So thank you again, Tony.
Been a pleasure, Brad. Thank you.
Thank you.